The mist hung low over the endless canopy, its ghostly fingers slipping between branches and vines as dawn crept across the prehistoric world. 7.5 million years ago, the Earth was a different place. Rivers ran wider, unbroken forests stretched for hundreds of miles, and life was painted in harsher tones: survival, struggle, and raw instinct. There were no maps, no kingdoms, no certainties. The land belonged to tooth and claw, to the roar of beasts and the hiss of venom. Through this wilderness moved two unlikely companions, the girl and the beast. The girl, whom others had once called Laia, was from a tribe that lived along the high cliffs near the river. She was young, no more than 19 reigns old, with slender limbs hardened by foraging and running. Her eyes were sharp and full of fire, and though her body was small compared to the giant predators that stalked the land, her will was unshakable. She had been raised with warnings: never stray from the tribe, never wander beyond the smoke of their fires, but warnings meant nothing now. The tribe was gone to her, burned out of her life in a single night of chaos and blood. The attack had come without warning. A rival band, painted in ochre and ash, had descended upon them like shadows from the dark. They were the savages, the savage, as some whispered, brutal hunters who worshipped fire and fed on fear. They cared little for land or peace. They thrived on conquest, and when they struck, they left no one safe. Laia had escaped by chance alone. She remembered the screams, the clash of spears, the smoke biting her eyes as huts collapsed. She had run until her lungs tore inside her chest, until her legs trembled with exhaustion. Somewhere in the forest, she collapsed, certain that the end had come. But the end did not come. Instead, she met him. He was a creature spoken of only in hushed tones among her people. They called him the Beast. Some said he was born of a union between man and demon, others that he was once a child of the cliffs, abandoned for his deformities and left to be raised by the wilderness itself. Whatever his origin, his presence was undeniable. He towered over her when she first saw him, a hulking shadow of muscle draped in furs and scars. His skin was bronzed by endless suns, his arms corded like tree roots, his jaw lined with teeth too sharp, too animal-like for a man. He carried no ornaments of a tribe, no beads or feathers, only crude weapons carved from stone and bone. His eyes, dark and piercing, seemed both savage and sorrowful at once. And yet, when the saber-toothed cat had lunged at Laia in her weakness, it was this beast who saved her. With a bellow that shook the canopy, he hurled a spear through the predator's ribcage, the impact echoing like thunder. The cat collapsed at her feet, twitching, its blood seeping into the soil. Laia had stared at him then, trembling, half expecting that she would be next. But instead, he had extended a massive, scarred hand to her. From that moment, their paths intertwined. Now, days later, they moved together through the labyrinth of forest. She walked lightly, her steps cautious, her ears trained to the rustle of branches that might betray hunters or predators. He moved like a storm-given human form, each step shaking the ground, his sharp senses tuned to threats she could not see. Their bond was wordless. She brought knowledge of roots, berries, and fresh water, he brought protection, strength, and ferocity. But danger never loosened its grip. The savages were still out there. Laia knew the tribe of painted hunters would not forget her. She had seen the hatred in their eyes. They were men, yes, but more beast than human, ruled by their gods of blood and fire. They tracked like wolves, silent and tireless, and once they marked prey, they would pursue it until either they or their quarry lay dead. "They will follow," she whispered one evening as they crouched near a riverbank. She could see her reflection trembling in the water's surface, her face streaked with dirt. "Savage do not forgive. They will not stop until they have my head." The beast looked at her, his jaw tightening. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and rough, more like the growl of an animal than a man's words. "Then let them come." She shivered, not from fear of him, but from the calm certainty in his tone. For him, death was not something to dread, it was simply another part of the endless circle of survival. Still, she worried, not for herself, but for him. He had saved her, and she could not let his loyalty drag him into doom. Yet each time she thought of leaving him behind, her courage faltered. Alone, she was nothing but prey. With him, she had a chance. That night, they camped beneath the shelter of a giant fallen tree. The forest hummed with nocturnal life, insects buzzed, distant predators called, and somewhere far off a river thundered. Laia huddled near a small flame they had coaxed from flint and dry moss, watching the beast across the fire. He sat motionless, sharpening a stone blade, the firelight dancing over the network of scars across his chest and arms. "Why do you stay with me?" she asked suddenly. He didn't look up, continuing the rhythmic scrape of stone against stone. After a long silence, he said simply, "Alone as death." Her throat tightened at the bluntness of it. She understood. Alone, neither of them would last long. Together, perhaps, they had hope. But the forest gave them no time for rest. At dawn, the beast woke first, his nostrils flaring. He crouched low, sniffing the air, then gestured sharply for her to follow. They moved swiftly into the undergrowth, her heart racing as she tried to keep pace with his long strides. When they stopped, he pointed to the ground. There, half hidden in the mud, were footprints. Human footprints. Laya's blood ran cold. The tracks were fresh. The savages had found their trail. Her breath came shallow, her chest tightening with dread. She remembered the faces of the men painted in blood and ash, their howls as they torched her home, their eyes shining with cruel firelight. She could almost hear their chants now, whispering through the forest. The beast straightened, gripping his spear. He didn't speak, but his eyes told her everything. Fight or flee, the choice had to be made now. She glanced around the forest, her pulse drumming in her ears. To flee meant running again, always running, never resting. To fight meant risking everything, but maybe, just maybe, it would end the hunt. The decision pressed on her chest like a boulder. And in that moment, a branch cracked behind them. A low growl of voices carried through the trees. Shadows moved in the distance, sliding between trunks like smoke. The savages were close. Laya's hand found the beast's arm, clutching it with desperate strength. He turned his head slightly toward her, his scarred face calm but alert. "They are here," she whispered, her voice breaking. He nodded once. The spear tightened in his grip. His teeth bared in a grim smile, more predator than man. "Then we make them bleed." The forest held its breath. The hunt was no longer a question of if. It had begun. The forest no longer felt alive. It felt watchful. Each rustle of leaves, each sigh of wind seemed filled with intent, as though the very trees leaned closer to witness what was about to unfold. The savages were near. Laya could feel their presence long before she saw them. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her ears straining to pick out the shuffle of feet, the hiss of whispers, the snapping of branches. The beast stood at her side, unshaken. His massive chest expanded with steady breaths, his spear clutched in a fist that could crush bone. To him, fear was an old companion, one he no longer bothered to acknowledge. His scars were stories, each one proof that he had survived where others had perished. Then, like shadows peeling themselves from the forest floor, the savages emerged. Their bodies were painted in swirls of ochre, ash, and crimson, the patterns turning them into living totems of war. Feathers jutted from their hair, bones dangled from cords around their necks. Their eyes glowed with the hunger of the hunt. At least 10 of them circled the clearing, their stone-tipped spears poised, their guttural chants vibrating in the air like the drumming of unseen hands. Laya's throat tightened, her knees threatened to buckle. She had seen these men before, in the firelight of her villages last night, when they slaughtered her kin. One stepped forward, taller than the others, his chest smeared with blackened soot, his mouth twisted in a grin of cruelty. His gaze slid over Laya as if she were already his prize. He raised his spear high and barked in his harsh tongue, a command that echoed through the trees. The circle tightened. Laya grabbed a stone from the ground, though her hands trembled. She could never hope to fight as the beast did, but she would not be taken alive. The beast placed his free hand briefly on her shoulder, steadying her. His eyes met hers, dark and steady, and she understood the silent message, "Stay behind me." Live. The first savage lunged. The clearing erupted into chaos. The beast moved like a storm unchained. His spear drove forward with bone-shattering force, piercing the attacker's chest. A cry split the air as the man crumpled, blood spraying across the leaves. With a guttural roar, the beast ripped his weapon free, swinging it wide to drive back the next 2 who rushed him. Laya ducked as a spear whistled past her ear, embedding itself in the trunk of a tree. She scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering, and hurled the stone she clutched. It struck one savage in the temple with a dull crack, and he staggered back, clutching his head in fury. The savages pressed in. There were too many. The beast fought like a demon, his muscles straining, his movements brutal and efficient. He smashed a skull with the butt of his spear, tore a weapon from another's hands, and drove his knee into a man's chest until ribs splintered. But for each foe he dropped, another took his place, shrieking war cries that rattled Laya's bones. Blood splattered her skin, not her own but theirs, and the copper scent filled her nose until she could hardly breathe. She darted between trees, searching for anything she could use, stones, sharp sticks, even roots. Her hands closed around a jagged branch, heavy and rough. She returned to the fight, slamming it down across the back of a savage who had crept behind the beast. He fell forward with a curse, and the beast finished him with a merciless thrust. But numbers told their story. The beast's chest heaved, sweat and blood streaking his skin. A cut opened along his arm, another across his side. He bellowed with rage, but even he could not hold forever against the relentless tide. "Run!" he roared at her, his voice a thunderclap. Laya shook her head, her vision blurred with tears. "No, not without you." For a moment, their eyes locked, a man who had embraced solitude his entire life and a girl who had lost everything but her will. In that instant, they were more than prey, more than hunted. They were something new, forged by blood and fire. A scream pierced the clearing. One of the savages had broken from the fight, his eyes fixed on Laya. He lunged at her, blade raised. She barely had time to lift her branch in defense before the beast hurled his spear through the air. The weapon struck the attacker mid-leap, skewering him like a boar. The beast roared again, but now his hands were empty. The circle of enemies closed tighter. Desperation clawed at Laya. She scanned the ground, saw the fallen spear of a savage, and seized it. Her fingers fumbled against its rough shaft, but she steadied her breath. She would not cower. Not now. The leader of the savages barked a command, and 3 men rushed forward at once. The beast met them head-on, ripping one's throat open with his bare hands, headbutting another until his face caved in. But the third slashed deep across his back, and his roar of pain shook the leaves overhead. Laya's scream tore from her throat as she drove the stolen spear into the attacker's side. He crumpled, but her arms shook violently from the effort. She had never killed before. The weight of it pressed on her chest, but there was no time to feel it. Survival allowed no room for mercy. The battle stretched on, a nightmare of screams, blood, and breaking bones. At last, only 2 remained standing, the beast and the leader. The other savages lay sprawled across the clearing, their painted bodies broken and still. Smoke from their torches curled upward, mingling with the steam of fresh blood. The leader's eyes burned like coals. His grin was gone, replaced by hatred. He circled the beast slowly, his spear gleaming red. The beast, wounded and weary, straightened his massive frame, refusing to bow. His chest rose and fell like a mountain breathing. His eyes, dark and unyielding, locked on the leader. For long moments, neither moved. The forest itself seemed to freeze, the air thick with tension. Laya's breath hitched in her throat. Then they clashed. The leader's spear struck with lightning speed, but the beast twisted, catching the shaft in his bloody hands. They struggled, muscles straining, veins bulging. The savage snarled, driving forward with every ounce of fury, but the beast's strength was primal, born of survival itself. With a roar that shook the canopy, he wrenched the spear free and rammed it through the leader's chest. The man's scream was cut short. His eyes rolled back as he collapsed into the dirt. Silence followed, broken only by the beast's ragged breathing. Laya dropped her weapon, her knees giving way. Tears blurred her vision as she crawled toward him. His body was covered in wounds, blood running freely, yet he remained standing, towering even in pain. He looked down at her, his face unreadable, then sank to one knee. She reached for him, her hands trembling. "You're hurt," he grunted, pressing a massive hand over one wound. "Alive," he said simply. And alive they were, against all odds. The forest slowly resumed its hum. Birds called again, insects buzzed, the river whispered. The world moved on as though nothing had happened, as though lives had not just been extinguished in blood and fire. Laya leaned into the beast, helping him to his feet despite his weight nearly crushing her. "We can't stay here," she whispered. "Others will come." He nodded. Together, they limped from the clearing, leaving behind the bodies of their hunters. The path ahead was uncertain. More savages roamed these lands, more beasts prowled the shadows. But Laya no longer trembled as she had before. The fear was still there, yes, but beside it burned something stronger, resolve. The beast glanced at her, his scarred face softening ever so slightly. For the first time, she thought she saw not just survival in his eyes, but trust. They walked into the mist, side by side, and though the wilderness loomed vast and merciless around them, for the first time, Laya believed they could endure. Not just as prey. not just as hunted, but as something new, beauty and beast, bound together against the savage world.